Africa was poor. Africa had no civilization. Africa had no history. Africa had no great cities. Africa had no universities. Africa had no scientists or inventors. Africa contributed little to world history. Africa was isolated from the rest of the world. Africa only became important after Europeans arrived. What if everything you were taught about Africa was incomplete? What if the continent that many people associate with poverty once supplied the wealth that fueled kingdoms across Europe? Educated scholars from 3 continents and built cities so advanced that many explorers refused to believe Africans had created them. Many people had grown with the same question. Did Africa have civilization? How rich or poor was Africa? Were they educated? Where are the books? Did they have science? Did they build cities? How were they connected to the world? And why isn't this widely taught? In the next few minutes, we will uncover forgotten libraries, lost universities, engineering marvels, scientific discoveries, and trading empires that changed the world. Imagine a time when the world's greatest source of wealth was not oil, diamonds, or technology, but gold. Long before European colonial empire existed, endless caravans crossed the scorching Sahara Desert carrying something more valuable than silver. Hundreds, sometimes thousands of camels stretched across the dunes, each loaded with bars of salt on the journey south and returning north with one of history's most precious commodities, West African gold. This trade transformed kingdoms into global powers. Between the 8th and 16th centuries, the great empires of Ghana, Mali, and Songhai rose in succession across the western Sudan region of Africa. Although they ruled at different times, each inherited the control over the strategic trade routes that connected West Africa with North Africa. At the heart of their prosperity were rich gold fields located in regions such as Bambouk, Bure, and later Akan territories. While miners extracted gold from rivers using simple but effective methods, merchants carried it across thousands of kilometers of desert to markets where demand was enormous. At that time, gold and salt became the twin pillars of the West African economy. The rulers of these empires understood something the modern governments still recognize. Controlling trade creates wealth. And instead of taxing farmers heavily, many kings imposed taxes on goods entering and leaving their territories. Every caravan crossing their borders generated revenue. Merchants paid custom duties, markets flourished, and cities grew into commercial centers where traders from many cultures exchanged not only goods but also languages, ideas, technologies, and religious tradition. These strategic positions made West Africa indispensable to international commerce. Historians estimate that during parts of the medieval period, West Africa supplied a remarkable large share of the old world's known gold production. That gold helped support coinage, long-distance trade, and economic activity across regions stretching from North Africa to Europe and the Middle East. The prosperity of Ghana, Mali, and Songhai was therefore never just a story about precious metals. It was the result of geography, entrepreneurship, organized government, diplomacy, and carefully managed trade, linking Africa to the wider world. But if wealth built this great empire, what transformed them into modern civilization, remembered for centuries, was something even more valuable than gold: knowledge. And nowhere was in that pursuit of knowledge more remarkable than in the great universities and libraries of medieval Africa. As the wealth of Africa grew, its greatest leaders made a remarkable decisions. Instead of investing all their fortunes in palaces and wars, many invested in something more valuable: education. While much of medieval Europe was still developing its earliest universities, centers of learning were already flourishing across parts of Africa, attracting scholars, merchants, judges, scientists, and theologians from thousands of kilometers away. One of the oldest surviving centers of higher learning in the world stands in the city of Fez, Morocco. The University of Al-Qarawiyyin, founded in 859 CE by Fatima al-Fihri. The institution began as a mosque but gradually evolved into a renewed center of advanced learning. Centuries before many famous European universities were established, students gathered there to study law, mathematics, astronomy, medicine, grammar, philosophy, and theology. Scholars who completed advanced study often received an ijaza, a written authorization from a respected teacher certifying that they had mastered a subject and qualified to teach it themselves. Though different from a modern university diploma, the ijaza was a respected academic credential across much of Islamic world. But the story does not end in North Africa. Far to the south, on the edge of the Sahara Desert, another city was quietly becoming one of the intellectual capitals of the medieval world. That city was Timbuktu. Today, many people know Timbuktu as a metaphor for a remote place. Yet, during the 14th, 15th, and 16th centuries, it was famous across Africa and beyond as a destination for learning. At the heart of its reputation stood the Sankore Madrasa, together with other important learning centers such as the Sidi Yahya Mosque. These institutions formed a vibrant scholarly community where students pursued advanced studies under respected teachers. Education at Sankore was religious. Its scholars wrote commentaries, copied manuscripts by hand, and produced original work on subjects ranging from law and philosophy to mathematics and astronomy. Wealthy families proudly built private libraries, while books became prized possessions, sometimes valued even more highly than other luxury goods because they represented learning, prestige, and intellectual achievements. In many societies, great cities were remembered for their monuments. Timbuktu became famous for its mines. Its reputation spread so widely that travelers described it as a place where scholars enjoyed immense respect and where the pursuit of knowledge shaped public life as much as commerce did. Yet, these remarkable legacies raises an unsettling questions. If Africa possessed universities, scholars, and vast collections of manuscripts, if thousands of books were carefully written, copied, bought, and preserved over centuries, then where did all those books go? The answer is a story of war, survival, and extraordinary courage. Because while kingdoms can fall and cities can be conquered, people that determined to protect knowledge will risk everything to preserve it. That is the story of Africa's hidden libraries. History often remembers the armies that conquered cities. Far less does it remember the ordinary people who risked everything to save knowledge. For centuries, the legendary city of Timbuktu had been one of Africa's greatest centers of learning. By the 15th and 16th century, tens of thousands of manuscripts had been collected across the city. These were not merely religious texts, they were scientific records of civilization. Within their pages were detailed discussions of astronomy, where scholars calculated the movements of planets and stars to determine calendars, prayer times, and celestial events. Other manuscripts explored mathematics using arithmetic and geometry for commerce, architecture, and inheritance law. There were also texts devoted to medicine. Scholars carefully recorded illness, herbal remedies, diagnoses, and treatments based on centuries of observations and experience. Physicians copied these works so that valuable knowledge could be preserved and shared with future generations. The entire collections were dedicated to law. Judges and legal scholars studied complex questions involving trade, marriage, inheritance, contracts, property rights, and governance. These manuscripts reveal highly organized legal systems that helped regulate life across prosperous trading cities. Together, these books painted a picture that challenged one of history's oldest misconceptions. They showed that African scholars were not isolated from the rest of the world. They were participating in international intellectual traditions, exchanging ideas with scholars across North Africa and the broader Islamic world, while also producing original works of their own. Then came the war. In 1591, Moroccan forces invaded the Songhai Empire, bringing an end to one of West Africa's greatest powers. Political instability followed, and over the centuries, Timbuktu faced repeated periods of conflict, decline, and insecurity. Many feared that the city's priceless libraries would disappear forever. Yet, something extraordinary happened. Instead of surrendering their collections, generations of families made a quiet decision. They would protect the books at any cost. Manuscripts were hidden inside wooden chests. Others were concealed behind the walls of family homes. Some were stored in underground rooms and secret hiding places known only to trusted relatives. Parents entrusted their children with a responsibility that stretched across generations. Whatever happened, never let the books be lost. For years, these families became guardians of history. Their names rarely appeared in history books. They fought no famous battles. They wore no crowns. Yet, without their courage, countless of manuscripts that survived today might have vanished forever. Even in the 21st century, when armed extremists threatened Timbuktu in 2012, librarians, local residents, and families secretly transported hundreds of thousands of manuscripts out of the city, hiding them in metal trunks and moving them to safer locations under immense personal risk. It was one of the greatest cultural rescue missions of modern times. Today, these survival manuscripts continue to reshape our understanding of African history. They remind us that beneath the sand of the Sahara lay not only caravans carrying gold, but also generations of scholars preserving ideas that crossed continents and centuries. But books were only part of Africa's genius. Beyond the libraries stood remarkable cities, engineers, craftsmen, and innovators whose achievements were carved not onto papers, but into stone, iron, and the very landscape itself. When people imagine the ancient science, they often think of Greece, Rome, China, or Middle East. Rarely does Africa come to mind. Yet, long before the modern scientific method was formally defined, African societies were observing nature, experimenting with materials, solving engineering problems, and passing practical knowledge from one generation to the next. This wasn't mythology. It was careful experience, observation, and innovation. One of the greatest examples is iron technology. For centuries, African blacksmiths transformed ordinary rocks into tools capable of changing entire civilization. Across regions, stretching from present-day Nigeria to Tanzania, furnaces reached temperatures high enough to extract iron from ore, and produce weapons, farming tools, and construction equipment. Archaeological discoveries show that ironworking developed in parts of sub-Saharan Africa at an early date, although scholars continue to debate exactly where and when some of these technologies first emerged. What is beyond dispute is that Africans became highly skilled, adapting to their furnaces to local environments and producing iron on a remarkable scale. Without iron, there could be no strong plows. Without strong plows, agriculture could not expand. And without agriculture, great cities could never grow. Medicine also flourished across many African societies. Healers accumulated generations of knowledge about medicine, plants, treating wounds, fevers, digestive illness, infections, and other diseases using carefully prepared herbal remedies. Much of this knowledge was preserved through oral tradition, while in places such as Timbuktu, it was also recorded in manuscripts that discussed diagnosis, treatment, and medical ethics. Some medical practices attracted international attention centuries later. In the 18th century, enslaved Africans carried knowledge of smallpox inoculation to the Americas. One of the best-known examples is Onesimus, whose explanation of inoculation influenced cotton matter during the 1721 smallpox epidemic in Boston. Although inoculation was also practiced in parts of Asia and the Ottoman Empire, this episode shows that African medical knowledge contributed to the wider history of disease prevention. Archaeology has revealed other remarkable achievements. In what is now Sudan, skeletons dating back centuries show evidence of complex bone fractures that had healed correctly after being carefully set. Such discoveries suggest that some practitioners possessed sophisticated practical knowledge of treating broken limbs, allowing patients to recover from injuries that might otherwise have been permanently disabling. Science was equally visible in engineering. Across the continent, builders designed structures suited to their climate using locally available materials. Massive stone walls rose at Great Zimbabwe without mortar. Sophisticated earthworks surrounded Benin City. Irrigation systems supported farming in challenging environments, while wells, terraces, and water management techniques helped communities survive changing seasons. Agriculture itself demanded scientific understanding. Farmers learned which crops flourished in different soils, how to rotate fields to preserve fertility, and how to adapt cultivation to rivers, forests, grasslands, and dry savannas. Crops such as pear millet, African rice, yams, and oil palm were carefully cultivated and improved over generations, feeding growing populations and supporting expanding kingdoms. For countless generations, African communities observed the stars with extraordinary precision. Astronomical knowledge helped determine planting seasons, predict seasonal changes, and guide travelers across deserts. Taken together, this achievement is different from the one many people learned in school. Note this: science did not belong to one civilization. It emerged wherever curious people observed the world, tested ideas, refined techniques, and passed knowledge to those who came after them. African scientists may not always have written in languages familiar to the modern world, and many of their names have been lost to history. But their discoveries shaped agriculture, medicine, engineering communities across the continent. This wasn't magic. It wasn't coincidence. It was science. And while these innovations transformed daily life, they were made possible by something equally extraordinary: the cities where commerce, craftsmanship, and knowledge came together on a scale that astonished visitors from around the world. For centuries, One of the greatest myths about Africa claimed that its people lived only in scattered villages before the arrival of Europeans. Archaeology tells a different story. Across the continent, powerful kingdoms built thriving cities with impressive architecture, sophisticated engineering, and international trading networks that connected Africa to the wider world. One of the greatest examples stands in the present-day Zimbabwe. Hidden among rolling hills are the magnificent stone ruins of Great Zimbabwe, built between the 11th and 15th centuries. The city once served as the capital of prosperous kingdom, controlling the trade of gold, ivory, and cattle. At its height, it may have been home to as many as 18,000 people. Its massive granite walls still rise more than 11 meters high in places. Even more astonishing is how they were built. Thousands upon thousands of carefully shaped granite blocks were stacked without mortar, relying entirely on expert craftsmanship and precise engineering. The walls have stood for centuries despite earthquakes, heavy rains, and the passage of time. Inside the city were homes, ceremonial spaces, storage areas, and carefully planned enclosures that reflected both political authorities and architectural skill. Artifacts recovered by archaeologists, including Chinese porcelain, Persian ceramics, and glass beads from India, demonstrate that Great Zimbabwe participated in international trade stretching across the Indian Ocean. Yet, when European explorers first encountered the ruins during the 19th century, many refused to believe Africans could have built them. Instead, some claimed they were the work of Phoenicians, Arabs, or even the biblical Queen Sheba. The evidence simply did not support those theories. Modern archaeology has overwhelmingly demonstrated that Great Zimbabwe was built by the ancestors of the Shona people. The earlier claims reflected the partial assumption of the colonial era rather than scientific evidence. African builders needed no foreign architects. They had mastered monumental constructions themselves. Thousands of kilometers to the west stood another remarkable city, the capital of Kingdom of Benin, known today as Benin City, amazed early European visitors with its organizations and beauty. Visitors described broad streets stretching for long distance, carefully planned neighborhoods, impressive royal compounds, and a city that appeared orderly and well-maintained. Surrounding the kingdom was an enormous network of earthworks, walls and moats extending for thousands of kilometers when measured collectively, built over many generations. These defensive works remain amongst the largest human-made earthworks ever constructed. But perhaps the kingdom's greatest achievement was not its walls, it was art. For centuries, Benin's master craftsmen perfected the sophisticated lost wax casting techniques, producing extraordinary brass plates, royal heads, ivory carvings, and sculptures of astonishing detail. These masterpieces became known as the Benin Bronzes. They recorded royal ceremonies, military victories, religious traditions, and the history of the kingdom itself. In 1897, everything changed. British forces launched what became known as the British Punitive Expedition to Benin. Benin City was captured and burned. The royal palace was looted, and thousands of priceless artworks were taken. Many of these treasures were auctioned across Europe to help pay for the military expedition itself. Museums and private collectors acquired them, and for more than a century, many remained far from the communities that had created them. Then, history began to turn. After decades of requests from Nigeria, several institutions acknowledged that the bronzes had been acquired through colonial violence. And in 2022, the Honeyman Museum and the Gardens transferred ownership of 72 Benin objects to Nigeria.
There was an expedition in 1897 and there was a lot of violence and they robbed the...
That same year, Germany began returning hundreds of Benin Bronzes from its state museum, including collections in Berlin, recognizing that the objects had been looted during 1897 invasion. This returns was not museum's decisions. It was acknowledged that those acts were stolen long time back during the military colonial era. Farther east, along the coast of present-day Tanzania, the prosperous city of Kilwa Kiswani flourished between the 12th and 15th centuries. Its cornerstone building, elegant mosque, places and busy harbor welcomed merchants from Arabia, Persia, India and later China. Gold from the African interior passed through Kilwa before reaching markets across the Indian Ocean, making the city one of the wealthiest trading centers of its age. To the northeast, in what is now Sudan, rose the ancient city of Meru, capital of the kingdom of Kush. Known for its iron production, impressive pyramids, reservoirs, and skilled metal workers, Meru demonstrated that advanced urban civilizations flourished deep within Africa long before the modern era. These cities were not accidents. They required engineers to design them, builders to construct them, merchants to enrich them, scholars to govern them, artists to inspire them. Together, they revealed a continent whose achievements were built not only in books but also in stone, bronze, iron, architectures that still stands centuries later. And these cities did not rise in isolation. They became powerful because Africa stood at the very center of some of the world's greatest trading networks. And it is very sad to know that for many people today, Africa is imagined as a continent who stood apart from rest of the world before the arrival of the colonial powers. But history tells a different story. Long before the age of exploration, Africa was already deeply connected to international networks of trade, culture and learning. Its merchants crossed deserts, sailed oceans, and welcomed visitors from distant lands. Goods, people, and ideas flowed in every direction, making Africa an active participant in the ancient and medieval world. To the north, vast caravans crossed the Sahara deserts, linking the great empires of Ghana, Mali, and Songhai with the cities of North Africa and the Middle East. Merchants transported gold, ivory, kola nuts, leather, fine textiles, horses, books, and manufactured goods traveled south. These caravan routes were amongst the busiest commercial highways of the medieval world. Along the African eastern coastline, another trading network flourished. The cities of the Swahili coast, including Kilwa, Kiswani, Mombasa, Zanzibar, and Malindi, became thriving ports connected to the vast Indian Ocean trading system. Using the seasonal monsoon winds, sailors crossed the ocean between Africa, Arabia, Persia, India, and China with remarkable precision. These predictable winds allowed merchants to travel one way during parts of the year and return safely months later, creating regular commercial routes that lasted for centuries. Ships arrived, carrying silk from China, fine cotton from India, spices, perfumes, glassware, and precious metals. In return, African merchants exported gold, ivory, timbers, animal skins, iron, tortoise shells, and other valuable goods that were highly prized across Asia and the Middle East. Trade, however, was never only about merchandise. Every ship and caravan also carried ideas. Scholars traveled alongside merchants, Religious teachers introduced new beliefs while learning local traditions. Architects borrowed construction techniques from distant lands and adapted them to African climates and materials. Mathematics exchanged methods of calculation. Astronomical knowledge spread between the regions, helping sailors navigate oceans and scholars better understand the movements of the heavens. Language themselves evolved through these encounters. Along the East African coast, centuries of interactions between African communities and traders from Arabia and Persia contributed to the development of Swahili, a language rooted in Bantu languages with many Arabic loanwords, reflecting generations of cultural exchange. This was not one-way flow of influence. Africa shaped the world just as the world shaped Africa. Its growth supported international commerce. Its cities connected continents. Its scholars contributed to intellectual traditions that stretched across North Africa and beyond. Its merchants helped sustain one of history's greatest trading systems. Far from being isolated, Africa stood at the crossroads of civilization. The evidence survives in ancient ports, archaeological discoveries, surviving manuscripts, foreign travel accounts, and artifacts recovered from cities across the continent. Yet, despite this evidence, I know you have one question in your mind. If Africa was disconnected, why do so many people today still believe the opposite? If the evidence is so compelling, if Africa built powerful kingdoms, educated renowned scholars, traded with distant civilizations, and produced remarkable scientific and artistic achievements, then why do so many people know so little about this history today? The answer is not a single conspiracy or a deliberate act of erasure. It is the result of centuries of historical change, conflict, colonialism, and the way history itself has often been written. Like every civilization, Africa experienced periods of prosperity and periods of decline. Kingdoms rose and fell, trade routes shifted, wars disrupt centers of learning. Some cities were abandoned as political and economic power moved elsewhere. One of the greatest losses of destruction and dispersal of knowledge. Although many manuscripts from Timbuktu survived because families risked their lives to protect them, countless others disappeared through war, neglect, humidity, insects, fire, and simple passage of time. Every lost manuscript represented a voice from the past that future generations would never hear. Another challenge was that much of Africa's history was preserved through oral tradition. Across continents, skilled storytellers, historians, and praise singers passed history from one generation to another through carefully memorized accounts. In West Africa, these custodians of memory, often known as griots, preserved royal genealogies, historical events, laws, and cultural traditions for centuries. For a long time, many European scholars regarded oral history as less reliable than written documents. Today, historians recognize that when oral traditions are carefully compared with archaeology, linguistics, written records, and other evidence, they can provide valuable historical information and help reconstruct the past. The colonial era also profoundly influenced how African history was taught. During the late 19th and early 20th centuries, many colonial administrations designed education systems that emphasized European history, institutions, and achievements. African civilization often received a little attention or were portrayed as less advanced than modern archaeological and historical research now demonstrates. This interpretation reflected the assumptions of their times. In some cases, they even shaped archaeology itself. When the magnificent stone city of Great Zimbabwe was first studied by many early European researchers, some refused to accept that Africans had built it. They attributed the ruins of foreigners despite the lack of convincing evidence. Modern archaeology eventually corrected those assumptions. Scientific excavations, radiocarbon dating, linguistic studies, and decades of research demonstrated that Great Zimbabwe was indeed built by the ancestors of the Shona people. Similar reassessments have transformed our understanding of many other African civilizations. The surviving manuscripts of Timbuktu have revealed sophisticated scholarship. Archaeological discoveries continue to uncover ancient cities, trade networks, and technologies once overlooked or misunderstood. History is not static. Like every civilization in human history, none of this means that Africa was a perfect continent. Just like every other civilization, African kingdom experienced conflicts, inequality, political struggles, and periods of decline. Great achievements existed alongside great challenges. Recognizing Africa's accomplishments is not about replacing one myth with another. It is about restoring balance to the historical record. The evidence is clear. Africa was home to powerful kingdoms, world-class centers of learning, remarkable scientific achievements, sophisticated artistic traditions, and thriving cities long before colonial rule. Understanding that history does not diminish the achievements of Europe, Asia, the Middle East, or any other part of the world. Instead, it reminds us that human civilization has always been shaped by many cultures, many people, and many centers of innovation. Africa's story is not separate from world history. It is one of the foundations of history, and perhaps the greatest misconception was never that Africa had no history. It was convincing generations of people that it was not worth looking for. Because once you do, you discover the story of Africa is not one of silence. It is one of civilization, knowledge, and resilience, and a legacy that continues to reshape our understanding of the past.